Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Deputy Chief Editor of Bulletin of Chinese Academy of Sciences, Yang Liuchun. It's the fifth lecture on theory and methodology of think tank. Our speaker today is Dr. Chen An from the Institute of Science and Development, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Dr. Chen's research focuses on risk and emergency management, as well as think tank theory and methodology. He's the co-president of the International Society for Crisis and Emergency Management, the promoter of Asia Crisis Society, the honorary chairman of Cross Street Society of Emergency Management, the visiting professor of many universities and institutes, and the chairman, director, and a member of multiple societies. He has published over 20 monographs and more than 100 academic papers, and presided over more than 30 research projects. Besides, at conferences, universities, research institutions, governments, and enterprises, he has delivered over 300 lectures. This theory and methodology in think tanks was proposed by the team of Professor Pan Jiaofeng, based on the links of data, information, intelligence, solution. This lecture focuses on the application of this approach in risk analysis, emergency management, and city governance. It analyzes the case of cities besieged by waste. From data collection, information disclosure, comprehensive judgment to solution formation, proposes corresponding solutions to think tank problems, and discusses more potential fields with these applications. The topic of Dr. Chen's lecture is applications of think tank these methods with cities besieged by waste as an example. Please welcome.
Think tank research is in the ascendant. China has been advocating think tank research. Research methods attract attention from scholars, but the public's attention is more on think tank reports, which are specific products. These products must have a foundation, and we cannot make a decision subjectively. The famous story of 3 visits to the thatched cottage also reflects data collection. Zhuge Liang collected data from chats or other means, and then found a final solution. Today, in the context of big data, we also need a standardized process. For this process, Professor Pan Jiaofeng from CESISD summarizes it into 4 letters, which can be simply read as DIIS. The first letter means data, the second information, the third intelligence, and the last letter S means solution. This method can support us to do more applied research. For example, I have studied many types of risks based on it, such as current emergency management among 31 provincial regions, the epidemic of African swine fever in last year and the year before last, and the COVID-19 pandemic in late 2019 to 2020. We can all go from data collection, information disclosure, to comprehensive judgment, and finally solution formation. In fact, there are more risks that can be studied based on this method. Compared with some overseas methods, including the Delphi method, I think it's a more comprehensive method, involving more stages and multiple aspects, which will facilitate to produce more think tank products, providing consultation for national decision-making. Hello everyone. Today I will introduce some applications of DIIS methods. Think tanks are becoming more familiar to us. China's government, a few years ago, began to advocate developing think tanks to give advice for the well-being of the people. Since then, think tank construction has been booming. Up to now, there are already hundreds of think tanks across the country. Most of them belong to certain fields, while some are comprehensive and regional. They are playing a bigger role, but their research methods are still traditional, such as the familiar Delphi method. Then, based on overseas research, Chinese scholars have also proposed our own approach, which is the DIIS method that we are talking about today. Its name has 4 letters. D indicates data, and the first I represents information. The third letter is also I, meaning intelligence, and it refers to judgment, but also wisdom in general. Here, it means judgment. The last letter S is short for solution. Data, information, intelligence, and then solution constitute the whole process of the method. After years of development, this method is more familiar to us and recognized by many organizations. More scholars have studied it. I use it to study the management of urban emergency and risks, as well as the management of agricultural risks. That is African swine fever. The DIRS method in these areas has satisfactory applications. Today, I will introduce one in detail, which is cities besieged by waste in 31 provincial capitals in China. We analyze the case with this method and provide corresponding solutions. I will elaborate on this issue from 4 aspects. The first is to collect data on informal landfills. This is because official landfills usually have standard management, and the worst cases are those caused by litter, which will greatly affect the surrounding environment. This is horrible. Except polluting the environment, they may also cause great damage to surrounding residents. This is the key problem. Second, I will introduce the current situation and risks of cities besieged by waste in China, and then the comprehensive judgment and corresponding solutions. Let's see that 5 years ago, there was a landslide in Shenzhen. This disaster is pretty unthinkable, which is caused by a long-term process. There is more than one mountain used as landfill in Shenzhen. People litter the garbage up instead of pressing it into blocks and piling it up. They just use trucks to pour garbage out and leave it there. It keeps going up, but the base is unstable. Finally, on December 20, 2015, the whole garbage mountain fell down, and the downstream households and factories were buried. That's very horrible, and it caused many deaths. This is unacceptable. Although this garbage mountain doesn't belong to informal landfills, it's in official planning. However, its management wasn't scientific, secure, and standard. That's a very big cause of the tragedy. Later, some scholars directly used Google Maps to look for other landfills like this in the surrounding area. Finally, he found that there were 2 not far from this landfill in Shenzhen. Will they fall like this, and when? It's uncertain. This scholar just searched for landfills using Google Maps, a software that everyone can access, and found 3. So such risks are everywhere. In the same way, we looked for such garbage mountains in other cities and found targets in almost every city, and there are even more than one in each. Then we have a problem that if the phenomenon of cities besieged by waste is so serious that needs analysis. In Shenzhen, it comes to us as an accident, and then do similar landfills in other cities also have such hidden dangers? Therefore, we need to study it. From the picture, we can see the rescue den and the surrounding environment around the garbage mountain. From factories and residential areas, there was only a few hundred meters. When the mountain falls, it can easily cover the distance. It will be better if it's a few kilometers away. But it's only a few hundred meters which can be covered in an instant. So the risk is bigger than we thought. Then, depending on the DIS method, we searched for the cases of cities besieged by waste in China's 31 provincial capitals, which are the objects of our research. The targets are informal landfills within 10 kilometers surrounding a city's building complex, and multi-dimensional data software and field research are adopted. Here, I'd like to introduce more. We can easily see the Earth directly by GIS or GPS. The data from the top are planar. When we see a thing, we will make a simple judgment. What is it? A building, a lake, or something else? We can make a rough judgment. But can dumps be directly judged from the data on GPS or ArcGIS? Generally, it is workable. After all, dumps also have basic image features, but we still have some worries. When we collected data, we went to some specific fields to see if they were the landfills that we found by the software, and then we found they were indeed. Through such comparison, we can finally believe that multidimensional data software can see things consistent with the field results. On such basis, we checked those informal landfills for areas, locations, and numbers. Then we draw a scene map of cities besieged by waste and set up a risk index system to see the dumps affecting the periphery. Besides, we analyzed, evaluated, and ranked those dumps, and finally gave countermeasures. That's our work in general. The left is Google Maps, and the right is also used a lot, ArcGIS. Now, China has also developed a lot of similar software applications, and some are quite good. When collecting data, we looked through many pictures showing places in Beijing, and it's quite a lot of work. So we organized many scholars for data identification and comparison. Of course, we used the learning function of the software. Once finding a landfill, we extracted its features, which can help to identify the next one. These are some techniques for data processing. Now, the pictures on the slide show the general situation of Suyi-Er village in Haidian district of Beijing. We can see farmlands, residential areas, roads, and other lands. They are shown roughly. The next few pictures have gone through technical processing. Some buildings are highlighted. We expect to identify an area from images at different times to see its changes in recent years. Google Maps, ArcGIS, or other GIS software all offer satellite images from the same place in different years. We can obtain photos taken 20 years ago, if lucky, maybe 30 years ago, to compare the changes. For example, some lakes turned into real estate, which can be reflected from those pictures. Let's move on to these 4 pictures from the same region at different times. In particular, we can see that the front left side of the red-roofed house has changed a lot. It was water, then it slowly turned into a field, and finally a landfill. It is a collection of images of the same place in a village at different times. Then landfills in different cities are presented. They are also highlighted. Those white points are landfills, and they are actually not this big. We made them a little brighter. We can see that there are many landfills around Zhengzhou and Shenyang, fewer around Lanzhou, and scattered around Hefei. There are also some around Huhot, but slightly fewer than those around Shenyang and Zhengzhou. Around Kunming, landfills are more concentrated. These are features of different provincial capitals. The data are very hard to collect, but we feel a sense of accomplishment after collecting them. We can see informal landfills in Table 1 about their areas. We counted a total area and respective areas of large, middle, and small ones, from Shenyang, Harbin, Hefei, all the way to Haikou, Huhot, and Lhasa. We can see their sizes divided by areas as well as the total area. The difference is very big. To our surprise, the landfill area on the outskirts of Shenyang is the largest, and then that in Harbin. The 2 northeastern cities occupy the top 2 positions, followed by Hefei, Guangzhou, Nanning, and Shanghai. We can take a look at Beijing, which has 800,000 square meters of landfills, ranking in the upper middle among all 31 provincial capitals. The better cases are Lhasa, Huhot, and Haikou. which might relate to less population and better environmental treatment. Their landfill areas are less than a tenth that of Shenyang, so the overall situation is not bad. On the right side of this slide, there are 4 pictures from Google Maps, which clearly display landfills, that is the white hateful part in the middle. They are informal landfills, growing bigger and bigger, and even eating away the surrounding vegetation of mountains. It was green all around, but the hole was dug to house garbage, and this hole got bigger and bigger. About this, I remember that when Beijing was just liberated, there was a place called Longxugou. Later, Mr. Lao She specially wrote a drama called Dragonbeard Ditch about this place. The environment there was very bad. Besides, there were also places called mountains, which were flat before, but turned into mountains due to too much garbage. Chairman Mao was dismayed to learn of this and determined to get rid of them. Not long after liberation, these garbage mountains and the environment of Longxugou began to be treated. Therefore, for cities, the impact of garbage is enormous, which can even attract the attention of countries' top leaders to resolve to treat it. Now, we have better techniques and ways to deal with it, and the treatment is more convenient, faster, and cleaner. These are the processes of data collection which are troublesome, but accumulate meaningful basic data. On this basis, we can know the risks of Beijing and the status of other cities across the country, whether we should learn from those cities in better conditions, and what we can learn from them. For example, there are many large cities with so much garbage that they can't compare with small cities, but we should always find a way to reduce and eventually eliminate these informal landfills. At least, we should make them into regular ones by corresponding measures. In the second part, let's see the status quo and risks of cities besieged by waste. With data collected, we can, in terms of area, divide the cities into different colors. Green cities like Lhasa, Haikou, Fuzhou, Hangzhou, and Shanghai are in good conditions. Red cities are at the highest risk. Then how can we process this data? It needs specific methods. In the link of information, based on data and the evaluation method, information is finally disclosed. The formula in the figure is a model of linear combination that allows indicators and their weights to multiply and then sum up. The indicators of the risks are divided into 3 categories. First, restrictive indicators include permanent population, consumption expenditure of urban residents, regional GDP growth rate, volume of urban garbage clearance, comprehensive energy consumption, and general solid waste yield. They are all available positive or negative indicators. Second, status indicators include administrative area, green coverage, GDP, and garbage stock. Third, driving force indicators include 5 specific indicators: garbage disposal document, harmless disposal ability of household garbage, expenditure of general public budget, quantity of sanitation vehicles, and harmless disposal rate of household garbage. These indicators are used to describe the risks, which come from different yearbooks, like China City Statistical Yearbook, China Statistical Yearbook on Environment, China Urban Rural and Urban Construction Statistical Yearbook, bulletins, and annual data in provincial regions. Data are collected to disclose information and review the risk of cities besieged by waste. Of course, something should be involved, but not, like site selection of informal landfills. Some are formed unwittingly, while others deliberately. The latter is intentionally selected by people. These are excluded. However, some cultural factors are important. With regard to garbage, in Beijing or elsewhere, Standard landfills or treatment plants encountered some controversies when being built. Placing it around my house will be refused by me because it might be smelly. This will lead to some regional risks and disputes. As a result, people might move. Landfills might fail to be completed. Some might be finished, but bring troubles to the neighborhood, which all have examples. Garbage is always difficult for us to deal with. Every city has to deal with it, formally or informally. However, to treat the garbage that disturbs people and the environment, we can draw lessons from the landfills in Taipei. They change places every several years, instead of sitting at a place forever. Or else, people buying a house around the plants will be so unlucky. Having been in landfills for years, the places will be transformed into attractions such as 798 Art District in Beijing and parks. Then people have hope because these plants will move several years later. So this measure of Taipei won popularity among citizens. Cities in China's mainland now do better jobs. The processing of the model won't be detailed. Consequently, the model divides the risk levels of cities based on the formula. Cities such as Nanning, Chongqing, Harbin, Chengdu, Shijiazhuang, Xi'an, Shenyang, Fuzhou, Nanchang, and Hefei are at high risks. Cities at medium risks are Beijing, Wuhan, Guiyang, Tianjin, Xining, Urumqi, Changsha, Zhengzhou, Haikou, Taiyuan, and Changchun. Blue areas show cities at medium risks, without obvious regional features. There are cities in the northwest, the northeast, the central plains, and southern China like Guiyang and Changsha. Medium-risk cities are not concentrated in a certain region. Low-risk cities are Shanghai, Kunming, Yinchuan, Huhhot, Lanzhou, Jinan, Lhasa, Nanjing, Guangzhou, and Hangzhou. Actually, many cities leave good impressions on us. Hangzhou, for example, is known as the heaven on earth, so it has a good environment. Hangzhou also does a nice job in garbage disposal. So does Kunming. These cities are at low risks. This is the link of information. Data collection takes much time and effort, but we can finish it with proper software and personnel. Collating this data is time-consuming, especially basic data. The link of information is relatively easier than the link of data, because it just determines indicators of these risks and their weights respectively. It's very important as the basis of the following comprehensive judgment. Meanwhile, it can reveal much information beyond data. In terms of area, Shenyang seems to have high risks because of its large area, but we have to consider its overall population. Beijing and Shanghai, with more population, do relatively nicer jobs. Though with the similar area of Shenyang, there are more people in Beijing and Shanghai, which could produce more garbage, such as household and industrial garbage. The garbage occupying not too large suburban area shows the excellent capability of garbage disposal and management. From this, low-risk cities do nice jobs. Then we move on to comprehensive judgment, the link of intelligence. Most cities have chaotic goals of environmental protection, which leads to higher disposal and overall risks. Garbage is terrible. The fall of garbage mountain in Shenzhen puts people in danger. Besides that, its awful smell causes even higher risks. A taxi driver ever told me his address and his irritation at passing by a landfill when returning home. I said, "Why are you irritated now that you are not heading for the garbage?" He said that passing there must make the car smelly, even just in a moment. He also said the car was still smelly when arriving home even a dozen kilometers away from the landfill, which is terrible. I haven't experienced this, but the driver has been disturbed all the time, and his irritation can be easily understood. In fact, when we return home after eating hot pot, our family members will know what you have eaten because the smell lingers long. Smell influences our daily life, though often neglected. It's a difficult problem to solve. Though people want to solve it, they don't know how to set the goal and provision. The second judgment result is that in cities actively engaged in governance, a single participant leads to a lack of predictability in governance, hierarchical methods, and the ability of risk prevention and control. Urban managers all want to do good jobs, but a single participant always has problems. Especially, we rely on the government to deal with all the things. We want a well-rounded government. Something that can be done by ourselves is regarded as the government's task. I have seen a very high garbage heap in a community. The property management company ran away, and the residents didn't know what to do, but turned to the sub-district office. The office said that was the company's business, and the office can only play a limited role. No one disposed the garbage, leading to the very high heap. So risk or garbage should be treated by multiple parties. In the third link, intelligence, we make comprehensive judgments. First, managers in many cities fail to set clear targets for environmental protection, and they don't know what they should achieve, triggering many problems. Second, garbage is disposed by a single participant. In fact, garbage disposal and other environmental problems are matters of concern for us all. However, people expect the government to be omnipotent to solve all problems, and the government often spares no pains. At present, the so-called social governance calls for multiple participants, like enterprises, social organizations, and the government to tackle public affairs. Today, the support of enterprises and social organizations is more, which we should emphasize in future. The so-called not in my backyard is that people refuse to live near the garbage. If their vital benefits are harmed, people will resist strongly. If less related to their benefits, garbage will be disposed with less motivation. We should care more about public welfare. In addition, the unclear distribution of benefits among participants affects the overall governance process. Who benefits and who pays for it should be made clear in advance. The benefits needn't to be stipulated, but we should make clear the interests. Jobs at a high cost but without benefits are difficult to do. A case in point is Rushan in Shandong province, where someone wanted to establish a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plants are common in many countries and coastal areas of China, which may be seen in inland cities. They, like cities besieged by waste, are considered dangerous. In fact, the risk of current nuclear power plants can be neglected. That in Chernobyl is almost impossible to happen in present technical conditions. However, residents don't think so. It is also a question of interest pattern. The case in Rushan for local people, especially those who need to remove, was good news. That might disagree with our thinking. On the one hand, they could be compensated. On the other hand, their jobs and social security might be guaranteed. Who was against it? Interestingly, there are people from Beijing who had bought houses in Rushan because they feared price reduction caused by the nuclear power plant. Under their opposition, the plant was established elsewhere. Garbage disposal has something in common. We should know the benefits relation. making clear who benefits the most. In this way, garbage disposal can be easier. So the key of garbage disposal is the benefit allocation mechanism. Besides, another reason is lack of motivation mechanism. For example, we can stop littering and start garbage classification. Without motivation, people will litter everywhere. If we drop garbage carefully and reduce landfills to the least, what are the benefits? We have no motivation. Hangzhou's good job lies in its motivation mechanism at all levels. People can gain credits and get some money in Alipay, and so on. Garbage proposal for citizens is motivating. So Hangzhou is less besieged by waste. National sanitary city is emerging. In June 2020, when General Secretary Xi Jinping received some anti-epidemic experts, he delivered an address. Though he talked about COVID-19, the address involved public health and the environment, and elucidated the fundamental points to fight against the pandemic. She mentioned something familiar to us, the patriotic health movement. Except for reporting after the pandemic shows up, how should we eradicate it? We should create a cleaner environment. The health also reflects patriotism. At present, in the global development of COVID-19, health is critical. Better health and environmental governance can help a city less besieged by waste. It may directly affect the health of the public, which is very interesting. The 13th Five-Year Plan pays more attention to the concept of governance. Then in 2017, China began to conduct a general survey of informal landfills which are then used, not just as something to be thrown away. So garbage power plants began to emerge, which generated electricity by burning garbage. In the past, we burned coal and now garbage. Of course, the disposal involves some special techniques. Anyway, governance is more reasonable than management alone. The participation of social resources is more frequent in such public affairs today. If we have some hierarchical and diverse means of social governance, the problem of garbage can be better solved gradually. In addition, Japan's garbage classification has also reached a pretty high level, which includes 5 types of garbage. Each type is collected on a certain day of the week. If this day passes, the garbage has to be left at home until the next week. With this method, the disposal is certainly easier, because the previous classification is done well. In fact, many cities in China's mainland also begin to classify garbage. What Shanghai has done in the past few years has been very impressive. Beijing also begins to focus on this problem. The children have memorized the rules very well, such as how to place the garbage of each type and which garbage belongs to the same type. All these require raising people's awareness of the risk of cities besieged by waste to a certain extent. Actually, the public affair can be very embarrassing, so there exists the so-called tragedy of the commons. That is, anything public is not cherished when we use it, because the cost is not mine, but the gains are mine. In general, this will lead to a problem. But we can only avoid this by improving people's quality and setting up a better restraint mechanism. After the comprehensive judgment of risks, as mentioned just now, based on the front-end data and the information obtained, we found something regular. After that, we should solve the problem of cities besieged by waste. That is the link of solution. In fact, this link emphasizes more front-end management, and we can't place this link at the back after the garbage has piled up, or even the garbage mountain has collapsed. It must have been noticed at the beginning. In fact, some garbage is left after mining, which is even radioactive and can't be thrown at will. In fact, front-end management is to design a reasonable mechanism. And finally, make garbage no longer a problem. And beyond that, we need to increase participants in garbage governance. For example, children will criticize you when they see you litter. Then, the national atmosphere is formed. So we need to foster a competitive environment for the waste market, relieve financial pressure, and enhance the government's initiative, thus reducing the risk. In addition to this, we should design an innovative mechanism system. In terms of garbage disposal, there must be punishment and reward mechanism. At last, the goal should be clear, and all the mechanisms aim at this goal. If there are a lot of things on the paper, but the implementation is very difficult, this may be problematic. So the mechanism design is ultimately important. Let's look at it specifically. Today's management of garbage includes classification, collection, transport, use, and disposal. Classification is in the first step, which belongs to typical front-end management. But at the moment, garbage classification in Beijing, although emphasized in last and this years, has not been treated well. The classification in Shanghai is in a mode, while in Beijing it's in another mode. There are several inconsistent modes in China. Then, if a person comes from Shanghai to Beijing, the classification of garbage may also be different. That's a problem. So, garbage is not just a thing of a city, but involves the whole country. Once the classification is done, the rest problems can be solved one by one. And if we perform collection, transport, and then classification, and finally consider use and disposal, the difficulty is squeezed into the middle. This is particularly improper and very difficult. A dozen years ago, I have seen it on Beijing TV about how the final garbage disposal plants work. I remember a point is that bagging was already a bad thing for garbage disposal at that time, because after bagging, in the final disposal, we need to rip the bags for further classification, which is troublesome and causes a lot of work. The front-end management is not good. The social organizations and enterprises today have played a greater role, including the NGOs related to environment. In fact, Liang Qichao's grandson, Liang Congjie, formerly in Beijing University of Post and Telecommunications, led an environment-related NGO, which had organized many activities. Our country is also advocating for more NGOs related to the environment. Of course, garbage disposal, transport, and classification are very important. We often see such news from newspaper or media that there are already piles of garbage on Mount Everest, and of course, all of which belong to informal landfills, caused by littering to form garbage mountains everywhere. The garbage can only be transported by the volunteers climbing the mountain, which is quite difficult. However, some people have noticed this problem and start to solve it. I think this is a big step forward. As for specific measures, classification is very hard. I think it may not be easy to classify the garbage in 3 to 5 years. After the classification, there is also a problem of door-to-door active collection. If someone is dedicated to doing it, maybe it will be better. However, it is costly and difficult. We can take a look at several mechanisms and systems. The lifelong accountability system is taken as an example. Regarding the environmental problems, the garbage mountain in Shenzhen can't stand anymore when it gets higher. First, the base is unstable, and at last, the whole mountain collapses. Who made this rule? Are we going to have him accountable after he retires? Recently, We have seen that some accountability rules about fairness in the college entrance examination have been put into effect. So, a long-term accountability system for environmental responsibility to avoid short-term behaviors is also very important. Another aspect is the dialogue and cooperation between cities in different regions, thus improving the governance and the ability of frontline personnel to identify and evaluate garbage risks. Because the types of risks are very different, the cognition of them is particularly difficult, and it's also true for the risk of garbage. For example, somebody may don't think it matters that much if he or she throws away one bag of garbage. So when does it matter? To what extent will this effect eventually spread? And what will the extent be like? For these questions, we are not sure. Then we need to know where really goes wrong. Put the garbage in this place all together for study as a case, and then inform everyone. Gradually, our cognition will get clearer. Another is the garbage disposal between the countryside and the cities. The garbage is often put to the suburbs, and informal landfills are not in the city center but the suburbs, or the rural-urban fringe zone. Then the garbage from the cities will be the burden of the people living in the fringe zone. Although the city is besieged by waste, the people in the city are far away from the garbage and won't be directly affected. But for those close to the garbage, they will be greatly influenced. So in this case, the garbage problem is dealt with through special funds allocated to the countryside. In fact, many people know that garbage in many developed countries, including household, electronic, and industrial waste, is transported to the developing countries. In fact, China used to be a particular large area to undertake such garbage for some time. But as we pay more attention to the environment, it's more difficult for the foreign garbage to come in. In this case, the garbage of our country and that from other countries are both problems. So how can we solve them? How do we allocate the funds? How do we select the location? Or can the disposed waste be reused? These are all problems that must be considered in terms of the system. The specific mechanism includes dynamic garbage charge. For example, for emission of harmful gas, more charge is for more emissions, less charge for fewer emissions, more charge for mixed garbage, and less charge for classified garbage. We use the charging mechanism for differential treatment, hoping to reduce the risk. In addition, another mechanism is the garbage not on the ground. The garbage is just left on the ground when a dumpster is full, which is very common. Can we just keep the garbage not falling on the ground once it gets out of the house, and then place it on a garbage trunk for transport and disposal? This is a core problem. In fact, there are already so-called multi-box garbage collection vehicles, and the enterprises or communities also have corresponding allowance. However, it hasn't become a consensus, and understanding is very different, which is also a problem. And beyond that, we should build the brand of a city and add dynamic regulations for garbage management. The dynamic is leveraging. Penalty makes people uncomfortable. But if I do it well, I will have a reward. The effect will be better. So, many cities continue to make efforts to build sanitary cities. Actually, to be sanitary, governments keep checking, because this thing is tied to almost everyone's income. Everyone pays much attention. During that time, the cities are much cleaner. A few cities with low garbage risks, as we just mentioned, such as Hangzhou, Kunming, Lhasa, and Huhhot, have really put a lot of efforts into daily maintenance. They have various constraints and dynamic mechanisms for individuals, communities, agencies, organizations, departments, or even an industry. These mechanisms have been tested and the results turned to be effective. I think other cities can think about how to introduce these mechanisms. Especially the big cities such as Shenyang have so many landfills and such a large area, but less population than Beijing and Shanghai. It is really worth learning from the practice of cities with a better garbage disposal. That's our solution. In fact, there is nothing special, but in public governance, social governance, and risk analysis, if we use the DIIS method for analysis, we can have much inspiration. Actually, except using DIIS to analyze the risk of cities besieged by waste, we also use this method for researching other problems. An example is the evaluation of regional differences in emergency management, in which, based on the DIIS method, we count how many types of unexpected risk events have occurred in different provincial regions this year, and the scope of impact of the events. In other words, we evaluate and rank the treatment ability and effects. We have been doing this for 4 years and will continue. In fact, after collecting data, disclosing information and charging, finally, for cities and regions, we propose different solutions, which is based on DIIS. In addition, we also analyze other risks such as African swine fever. For this problem, it's easy to collect data and we just need to see the price of pork in the market. If it continuously increases, the problem has had a very big impact on the whole country. Well, what kind of information can we get out of it? The impact of African swine fever is evenly distributed in China, affecting everywhere. What is the reason behind it? Finally, we find that it's the emphasis of people on the environment that makes free-range pigs fewer, while those from large-scale farms more. In those farms, once a pig is sick, those close to it will also become ill. However, we hope not to let go of anyone. If a pig is sick and we don't know it, it will affect the people in the market, which is really bad. So, we should see the reason behind it. Then the judgment and the corresponding solution come out slowly. For example, we can import pigs from different countries. In fact, some countries in Central Asia raise pigs on a fairly large scale, and we have imported plenty of pork or live pigs from them. Besides, we should relax the constraint on pigs raised in households. When they only want to raise a few pigs, we shouldn't stop them due to the impact on the environment. Instead, we should relax the constraint so people's enthusiasm for raising pigs will be aroused. Finally, the whole situation will be better and the pork market will not be so tight. This is another example that we studied. We also use the DIIS method for many other cases. I believe that as long as our problem and purpose are clear, we can display the solutions based on the 4 links of DIIS, and some solutions are operational. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thanks to Professor Chen An for the wonderful lecture. Think tank is closely interrelated with realistic decision-making. The story of the visits to the thatched cottage is a classic case of think tanks. The role of think tanks in modern society is more prominent. The report of Professor Chen An adheres to think tank applications and analyzes the real problem of cities besieged by waste, according to the procedure and logic of these. From data to information, intelligence, and then solution, this report presents a very complete series of applications of the think tank theory and methodology. Actually, the paper with the topic of cities besieged by waste, published on the Bulletin of Chinese Academy of Sciences, later reprinted by Xianhua Wenzhai, has received the attention of a vice mayor of Beijing, who transmitted the paper to the relevant department and put forward specific follow-up requirements for correction. In particular, for several villages analyzed in this paper, the actual disposal and response results were inquired, so this paper really shows the role of a think tank. Theory and methodology ultimately serving for practical cases is the core of think tanks. We expect more think tank projects to follow this method, and then more feasible solutions serving for decision making. Thank you for your attention.